All right, so welcome everyone again to how to get into graduate school. And I am your host today. My name is Shalom Yam. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with the event assistant. I'm with the career success team. And today we're really happy to have Mauricio Ramirez, who is a UCSC alum, to kind of share his experience in getting into graduate school and share some tips and tricks on how you can get into a graduate school. And hopefully this can help you with the preparation of the graduate and professional school fair week that's happening on October 26th through October 29th. And I'll be linking that in the chat below after this introduction. And some of the logistics, we are recording this session and the recording will be sent to everyone who registered for this event. And throughout the webinar, please put your questions in the Q&A box and we'll be answering the questions at the end of the presentation. And at the end, please fill out a survey. It will take you less than 5 minutes. And before we kick this off, I'm going to do a land acknowledgement. So the land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Waswa-speaking UP tribe. The Amamutsun tribal band comprised of the descendants of indigenous people taken to Mission Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during the Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma. And with that, I'm gonna kick it off to our UCSC alum, Mauricio.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Let me share my screen. 1 second. All right, so you should see my PowerPoint on the screen. Title for the event is How to Get into Graduate School. It's really meant to prepare you to kind of begin to think about graduate school and what it means, but also how to get in. So there is some tips and tricks within, and it's really kind of a personal anecdote as well. Those are kind of my own experiences is what I'm going to be sharing. So I hope that is useful in the long run. So who am I? I'm currently a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, in the Latino Studies department. I graduated from Latin American and Latino Studies, a PhD program here at UC Santa Cruz in June of 2021. So relatively new program. I'm actually, I believe, the second person to graduate from this PhD program, which launched, I believe that was the second cohort. Believed it launched in 2014, if I'm not wrong, 2014 or 2015 is when this PhD program began. So I am one of the few who have graduated. I also graduated from the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, relatively small kind of liberal arts college. And I earned a Master's of Arts, so MA, in teaching visual arts. It is a K-12 credential that also allowed me to, if it might sound a little confusing, but it's really like a Master's of Arts in education. So it's more to teach at the K-12 level. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. I also attended UC Santa Cruz as an undergraduate, a proud UCSC slug, right? One of the best mascots in the world. And I'm class of 2011. So beginning, kind of breaking this down into 2 stages, really the planning stage and then the execution stage. So planning is very important, getting yourself into this PhD program, right? Or a master's program. So you have to really think about both of them in terms of, well, what do I really want to accomplish? Is it a PhD program? Is it a master's program? Those are all things you have to think about. And they're all very personal, right? They're at a personal level. No one could really decide for you because you are the one who's going to go through the program. And you're the one who's going to apply for the program. So think about that, because I think some people might enter these programs for the wrong reasons, right? And so it can become very personal. It does help to have support, especially if you're in a PhD program, which takes years to have a supportive cast, right? When we think about mental health, a master's degree might be a little bit more straightforward. So the path to gaining a master's degree is usually around 2 years. And so PhD versus master's, well, in the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about that. First, it begins with thinking about graduate school and a list, right? Thinking about what schools could I potentially see myself entering, or what programs could I see myself entering? You can be very selective in terms of where you want to apply. For example, I only applied the first time I applied, and I only applied, I guess this is in reference to the PhD program. I was a little bit more selective in picking the PhD program because I did not want to move too far away from the West Coast. I'm originally from San Francisco, so I wanted to stay on the West Coast. So all of the schools I applied to were in California, except for one, which was the University in New Mexico. And I myself was being very open in terms of what I was applying to. I'm an interdisciplinary scholar, so that allows me to kind of go into different disciplines. So I applied to sociology, I applied to ethnic studies, I applied to Latin American and Latino studies program. I applied also to art history programs. Now, I only applied to 5 schools, UC Berkeley, UC Santa Cruz, UC Santa Barbara, UC San Diego, and the University of New Mexico. I got into University of New Mexico as an art history, but they wanted me to do a master's in art history. Since I had already gained a master's in art education, I really didn't want to go that route, and they didn't offer any financial package. So I did not select University of New Mexico, but I did select UC Santa Cruz, which was a PhD program. And so I went with Santa Cruz, which, you know, in hindsight, it was actually one of my top choices, that one in UC Berkeley, because they're in the Bay Area and I wanted to remain, you know, as close to home as possible. So again, you can be selective depending on your hopes, desires, and tolerances. I say that as well because I'm thinking about when I applied to my master's program, which was at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, for the master's program, I knew I wanted to be on the East Coast. I had just graduated undergrad. There was 1 year, I took kind of 1 year in between. And in that year, I was applying to grad school programs. I didn't apply to that many. It was kind of a unique situation where I applied halfway through the year, which is very odd in itself because usually you would apply. There's usually dates to when you can apply, right? Like right now would be, I think a lot of applications are probably due around this time. So also the timing is very important in thinking about when to apply. I thought about this kind of relatively late, and luckily the programs I applied to allowed for me to apply kind of on a rolling basis. I mean, some master's programs are like that. They're all very specific. And so I actually started mid-year. So I started in January, which usually, you know, a quarter system would begin in October or in September, August sometimes. So when I think about tolerance, I think about, do I want to live on the East Coast? Me coming from San Francisco, never have lived in any other state other than California. The East Coast, I knew was going to be a change. I knew there was going to be snow. There's actual seasons, right? There's 4 seasons. For someone that's from California or native to California, you know, you might not be used to that weather change. Maybe if you live up north or Northern California, you might have some of those, you know, cold or have experienced living in the snow. But from someone that's from San Francisco and maybe even Southern California, right? It's a huge change, cultural change, different demographics, different people live there. You know, Philadelphia is a really kind of interesting city in itself. So I decided to try something different. I mean, I'm still, you know, straight out of undergrad, and I just wanted a different experience. And I was really lucky and fortunate to find a really good program and supportive people, which is definitely a journey. And it was a journey I wanted to do, right? It was, you know, I knew ahead, you know, I could have applied to California schools, but I didn't, right? So that's what I mean of your own tolerance level. That is all up to you, right? Because I knew it was 2 years. I knew it was going to be extremely long. So once you have your list, separate them into dream schools. Dream schools are those schools that, it might be a stretch to get into. You might not have the GRE scores. They might be highly selective. That in itself is very hard. It's very unpredictable who they let in. You never really know why or how you got in or why you got accepted to these programs. So those dream schools are the ones that are, stretched, right? The target schools are probably the schools you will most likely get into because you have the GRE scores, or there's a good fit in the program. Maybe you had a relationship with a professor that you plan to work with, right? So there, sometimes there's indicators where it's like, okay, I might get into the school just because I might, know faculty, or you might have already established a relationship, or maybe you applied more than once. And then there's safety schools. These are schools that you will probably most likely get into. Some of them have high acceptance rates. And so that's a good way to kind of divide them into three sort of categories, right? Dream schools, target schools, and safety schools. And it's really up to you as to how many schools you want to apply to. Some people, might suggest 10 schools to be safe. I applied to 5. And again, it's up to your own tolerance level. Some people apply to like 20 schools, right? And so, I think that's also a very personal choice. But obviously, if you widen your net, then, chances are you'll probably get accepted to more schools, right? If you apply to several. And again, this is a cycle. So if you apply 1 year and don't get into any, you'll know the next year that you can apply to more or less, right? So thinking about the master's versus a PhD, there's a huge difference, right? They're both graduate schools, but the graduate degrees are very different, right? There's a huge significant investment of time, and I think time is precious, right? Master's degree, like I said before, usually 2 years. There's some, degrees that offer, kind of partial, like status. You don't have to be full-time student. A lot of master's programs cater to the working, for those who are working, so it might be in a different field, or say you do have a 9-to-5 job, you can maybe do weekends. My sister did a social work master's degree that took, I believe, more than 2 years, and I think it was a 3-year program, and it required going to campus on the weekends, and of course taking classes kind of remotely. But and now with COVID, I'm not so sure how things have changed in terms of the master's degrees, but I would assume that there's a lot more programs that cater to working remotely, right? Not having to be there in person. A PhD usually takes at least 5 to 6 years. It's very rare, I think, for someone to finish under that, unless they already know, their project. And many people take 7 to 9 years. This also really depends on discipline. I remember there's, it's called the EDD. So there's a PhD in education. And I remember that program didn't take 7 to 9 years, but it all really depends. And you'll get a sense of this. And this is maybe a question you ask beforehand, asking students that or if you get accepted, you should ask, what's the typical rate, right? How many years does it take to finish this program? And they'll let you know, right? Probably the fastest person who finished might have been in 5 years, but there's people that take 9 years. And this is all relative, and this is very much to the PhD level, because life happens. For example, I thought I was going to be able to finish in 5. Towards my last 2 years in the program, I married, and I also had a baby. So these are life. I guess that's to say that life happens, right? Things happen. There's also a statistic out there that a lot of people that start PhD programs don't finish them. So there's like a 50% dropout that's a very general statement, and that's not to scare you or to not persuade you to, go to a PhD program. But it does happen, right? People drop out. People realize, I can't be in this program, or I can't afford to. Um, maybe, I mean, it's all relative, right? People have personal excuses, and maybe it's a health issue, right? There's all types of reasons why people don't finish PhD, and it's completely fine to not finish a PhD program. It's pretty intense, right? To think about something, if you're going to spend 5 to 10, basically 5 to 10 years of your life in doing a PhD program, it obviously requires a lot of stamina, right? And resources, which is my next point. Thinking about money, right? So schools cost money, there's tuition, there's fees, there's books, there's rent to pay. Um, Master's degrees usually offer less scholarships, and you might have to pay that tuition out of pocket or with loans. So that is also a very personal decision, and thinking about, well, maybe I came out of undergrad with a lot of loans. Um, can I stomach having more loans on top of that for a master's degree? Is there a payoff, right? Um, Maybe you'll be earning a lot more once you get the master's degree. So those are all, again, very personal decisions that you're going to have to make. PhDs, on the other, so one thing about the master's programs is that there is scholarships, but that is also based on, they're very competitive, I guess, at the master's level. So sometimes if you have really high GRE scores, or you're just like a very outstanding candidate for the master's program, you might qualify for scholarships. But typically, again, they're very competitive. They're not going to allow for every one of their master's students to have scholarships, right? Some departments might work that way, but it's very rare. Usually most folks pay out of pocket or take out loans, right? PhD degrees offer more financial assistance, and that is usually through teaching and research assistantships. So I would assume all of you are from UC Santa Cruz. So if you've ever had a TA, the TA is, that is their job, right? To teach sections or assist in grading papers, right? And that in return is what pays for tuition. So that is also, on top of getting paid a pretty minimal salary. It's not a very high salary when you're a teaching assistant or a graduate teaching assistant, but it pays for tuition. And for some, that's the trade-off, right? Not having to pay for tuition, well, that's great, right? I don't have to pay for tuition. I don't have to take out more loans, right? But and this is, I'm kind of skipping to the last point, it could be a significant loss of money if the student, right, the graduate student, is not working or is earning low wages through assistantships or part-time employment. And so that's also something you have to realize too. What if where you live is very expensive? I would say a lot of places or universities in California are relatively, expensive outside of the university. So rent is probably the biggest burden, right, in California, and in probably a lot of expensive major cities across the United States. But then you could think about, like, I remember University of New Mexico, I knew the cost of living was very low. So do factor that in, right? Think about, those are just personal, again, very personal decisions that you have to make. And again, for a PhD program, I like to think about it as it is a marathon, not a race. So it's a very long term. I mean, again, thinking potentially 5 to 9 years of your life, right? There's a lot that could happen during those 5 to 9 years. And it is certainly an investment of money and time. So reach out. So again, for the planning stage, before you even apply, you can do this. I didn't do this. I wish I knew more, to be honest, when I applied to both the PhD program and to the master's program, is you can use your resources. So, I assume everyone's savvy at using the internet. You can go into departments, right? PhD departments, master's programs department, and you can see their current graduate students. And usually their emails are there, or their contact info is there. So you can go ahead and just simply email them It will be kind of sort of out of the blue, but it's not unheard of, right? When I was a grad student in the Latin American Latino Studies program, I believe at least 3 times I talked to somebody that was like a prospective student that wanted to apply and just wanted to know more. And I would explain to them, whatever specific questions they had, right? It was every person I think that reached out was asking for kind of different, just different details about the program. And so it's not uncommon for grad students to kind of receive these emails, but also don't feel disappointed if they don't answer the email as well. Some grad students might be busy, or some students might see the email and just kind of, brush it off. You never really know what's happening in a grad student's personal life. So if you don't hear back from them, it's okay. But again, the worst answer you can get is probably a no. So it's always good to ask. Like, don't be afraid or don't be shy to ask. I think that's important, especially after graduating college, right? Oh, like, don't be afraid to ask questions, right? Ask many questions. I myself was pretty shy undergrad. Like, I didn't ask any questions to professors usually, right? So yeah, just you need to kind of get over that, because it's you're at the point where it's like, now you're talking about jobs. You have to really kind of shy and kind of break out of that shell if you are that shy person. Some of you might not be. I'm assuming here. So asking current, or past members of the program. You can also use LinkedIn. LinkedIn is another resource to see someone's kind of trajectory. You could see, okay, they did a master's in the program you're looking for, and they already graduated. So you might want to also use LinkedIn as a form of kind of resource, right, for networking. A question to ask when you do reach out to these grad students, and maybe they want to talk through the phone, maybe they want to Zoom, maybe they might want to meet in person. It all depends on where you're at physically. So ask what advisors you should work with. Some master's programs ask that. Most likely the PhD programs will ask, what advisors do you see yourself working with? That's always kind of a tricky one, because you don't actually know these professors. So again, you have to think about how their research fits your research, right? That's always a good kind of, or you can also say, I can envision myself working with this professor for this reason, but I can also envision myself working with, Professor X or whatever because of this reason. So, it's always good to state that in your application. Now, you might not end up working with that professor for whatever reason, right? Professors sometimes kind of pick and choose what students they want to work with. But that's okay, right? The point is to get into the program. I mean, that's something you would think about afterwards. But asking grad students that question is also good, because some grad students have really good insight as to how the department works. And they might say, okay, well, this professor might not be a good fit. And they'll let you know, right? I think a lot of grad students are pretty honest if they're going to take that call or that meeting with you. Ask what academic work culture is like. That's always good to know, right? You want to know what you're getting yourself into. Some grad programs, students publish a lot, or they're expected to publish, right? It's all very specific to the department. So that is a good question to ask as well. And what are the expectations of grad students to the department? You can also ask, how is it like living, in whatever area if you're not familiar? So then they'll tell you, right? They might even tell you where to live, right? Or what are cheap places that grad students like to live in, or don't live in that neighborhood, right? You can establish a relationship, and that's good, because if you end up in that department, well, you already have some sort of relationship with like a higher grad student that's a cohort or two, or 3 or 4, above you. Because again, if you think about it, if someone's in their 9th year, that can be a very resourceful person to talk to. Again, you might not get to that person, but people or students in grad programs use them as a resource, right? So thinking about requirements, admission requirements, many grads programs, their requirements overlap, which is good in a sense, because you don't have to do that much more work. A tip that I suggest is create a general statement and then tailor it specifically to that program or department, right? Um, that's important. So just create that general statement, make sure it's really good, polish it, ask other professors or colleagues, or people that can write really well to see those statements, and then just tailor them to the specific programs or departments, right? Again, I was applying to a wide range, right? I was art history, right? Sociology and ethnic studies. There was some overlap because my general project was going to remain the same. But I had to speak a little bit more to art history when I was talking about art history, right? I had to speak a little bit more to sociology when I was applying to sociology program. So that's, again, you tailor them. Almost all graduate schools require the same thing. So again, transcripts, important. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We'll also talk about letters of recommendation, and we'll talk about the GRE / GMAT scores. And each school is going to require that personal statement. But for that, some are very specific in what they want to see. Some might ask for like diversity statements. Again, they're very specific. Answer the prompt. Don't go off on tangents. Make sure you make a checklist and also kind of decipher what they're really asking. If you're unsure what they're asking, ask somebody else. Like, what do you see? What do you think they're asking here? It's pretty straightforward, but you have to make sure you hit each point, because again, you're basically replying to their prompt, and that again is where you tailor, because not every department might ask like very specific questions, and so you have to tailor and make sure you're writing to that specific department. If not, you're going to miss that point, and could be costly. But again, that's up to you to do your research, and that's why these can take, imagine applying to 10 or 20 schools, right? You have to tailor some of these to make sure you're kind of hitting the points that they're talking about. So since we're still in the planning stages, how to stand out. You might be a recent grad from UCSC, right? UC Santa Cruz. You might be towards the end of your undergraduate career. So you might take time off. You might not go. I mean, some people go directly into a master's program. Some people go directly into a PhD program after their undergrad, and maybe they're applying while they're in undergrad. I remember folks telling me, take a year off, take 2 years off. Don't immediately go into a grad program, kind of experience life outside of academia. And that was a good tip. I, for example, did not go directly into a PhD or a master's program. I took a year off, but in that year, I had, experience in what I wanted to do, which was education. I couldn't find a full-time job though, so I did a part-time job, and it was tutoring K-12 students. It was a good real, life experience. And it was a good break, because I think going straight into the master's program would have been somewhat challenging. So again, that's your decision. You can take years off, right? You can have real life experiences like a job, internships, and then go to the master's program, right? But you have to also be strategic, because if you are thinking about grad school, there's certain things you can do to kind of improve or maybe stand out from the rest of the applicants or candidates. So grad school, when they're reading your documents, they want to make sure that you're confident in your career choice, that it makes sense. I, for example, was an artist, an art major, like I explained earlier, and I was going into an art history program. That, kind of made sense, right? I've taken art history courses, so it wasn't too much of a stretch. I think sociology was somewhat of a stretch. I didn't take many sociology courses, so they can see that in your transcript. And the way in which I was writing or analyzing, that's kind of where sociology fit in, because I was using and citing sociologists for the research section of what you present as kind of like a sample essay. But in the end, I ended up in an interdisciplinary program that allowed me to do kind of both, right? little bit of art history, a little bit of sociology. It's Latin American and Latino studies, so already just the name, the department is very interdisciplinary, and that's where I fit in, and I think that was a good choice for me. But thinking about the past, like, so what have you done to make yourself stand out? If you're going to take an internship, that might be a great way to kind of demonstrate diversity. If you take a job related to the field, this is all very general because I don't know what, internship opportunities can allow for certain, I don't know, prestige. I don't know if you work for a research company or a huge, for, I really, there's different ways in which you can kind of shine, but make sure it makes sense to where you're applying to or what you're applying to. Because you're gaining experiences, right? And that's the important part of taking a job or taking a internship. If you're in some sort of research field, taking a research position, right? Again, you can also volunteer. If you're strategic in how you volunteer, say I wanted to go into art education, which I really wanted to when I did the master's program. I had a lot of experience teaching students, K to 12, and I also painted murals with children, or not children, high school. Actually, it was really helpful now that I'm thinking about it. I created a mural with juveniles at Santa Cruz Juvenile Hall, and that was my senior year. And that actually, I think that's what I might have stood out, because I created a mural, and then I think I was on the dean's list too. It was a very specific award I received from working with youth in juvenile hall. And that was all kind of, not that I was really like, I knew that I wanted to go in a master's program, but that was something I definitely wrote, and I highlighted it, right? That allowed me to probably stick out, right? Not that many people are going to create murals with youth at a juvenile hall, right? I think that's something very unique. And if I'm going to K to 12, master's program to teach at the K to 12 level, well, obviously that, I stood out as a candidate. So again, demonstrate your diversity. What makes you different from the rest? Those small little internships, volunteer opportunities, they can really set you apart when you go to apply. So do keep those in mind. And you can make those relevant, now, right? If you want to take an internship or a volunteering experience, do it, because then you can kind of position yourself as strategic, right? And thinking about, the master's or the PhD, right? Again, so this is the GRE exams. Some people don't, I honestly didn't take, some people can, you can pay for tutors, you can do programs that prep you for the GRE. It could be very costly. And most schools do require the GREs. Very specific to the program. Look for that, because if they do require them, then you have to take them, obviously. Some don't, and some are optional. I remember a couple of, maybe two of the ones I applied to was said optional. I still uploaded them. I didn't have the best GRE scores, but also the GRE scores, keep in mind that I don't know, say it's the last point on this PowerPoint. Some programs might care about a math score, right? It all depends on what you're applying to, but not your verbal score, and vice versa, right? So it's all relative to where you're going to apply to. If a program doesn't care about, your math score, then obviously you know where to prep. You know what areas you need to prep for. And that's good, because obviously you don't want to prep for something that doesn't really, it won't really count. But what I have heard is GRE scores can translate to more funding packages, or those scholarship opportunities I was talking about, or potentially a higher probability of acceptance. But that's all relative, right? If it's very competitive and you're kind of assumed to have really high GRE scores, that could be the case. But also, don't, I guess, if you have low or kind of mediocre GRE scores, like, it won't really, like, say you have a fantastic project, and a professor really sees, a bright future, your GRE scores might not matter, right? Like, so, take it as it is. do take them, obviously, if you have to. And, you could take them twice. I believe you could take them multiple times. And some places might just accept the highest score. I don't know if some places take like an aggregate of all of them, but again, those are all very specific to to the department or to the program you're applying to. So do, research and obviously study for the GRE to have as best scores as you can. But again, um, one thing I did want to say was how it could translate some more funding. I did recently talk to a first year PhD student, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in talking about leveraging when you do get accepted. But he was offered more money at a different institution, but he really wanted to go to the institution they are at now. And so they didn't allow, they said that their GRE scores were too low to allow for that extra funding that was, I guess maybe reserved for those with high GRE scores. However, they leveraged their, the fact that they got accepted somewhere else to get summer funding. They said, okay, we can't, give you, that funding you're looking for, but we can fund your summers because we're looking, the other department that they got accepted into was offering a little bit more money, but they didn't really want to be there. So they ended up, at this other institution, and that helped because summer funding is another thing that, I think as grad students struggle with. Sometimes there's no funding during the summer. It really depends on what some packages do come with summer funding, some don't. Keep that in mind as well. Ask grad students, like, what do you do for the summer? Like, how do you, get by? Because that is also like a very real, some people can really worry about them. And I worried, my first year, but luckily I landed summer jobs, somewhat unrelated to my field. I was teaching, but because I had a teaching background, I was able to use that, right? My other master's program, when I went to the PhD program, I was teaching Lego robotics to I think elementary school age to middle school age during the summers. And that was, that's how I was able to get a paycheck for the summer. And that was great. And eventually, down the line, I got summer teaching positions to teach at San Francisco State. I was a lecturer, and yeah, that was my way of paying the bills for the summer, right? So that was just a personal anecdote to think about. Letters of recommendation. Don't be so. This is an interesting, some of you, like I said, might have been shy as an undergrad. Maybe didn't reach out to professors. Maybe didn't connect with professors. Don't be shy for asking and reaching out and emailing a professor you took a course with. You might have to explain how much of an impact, right, that course had on you, and that you obviously had a good grade. Like, don't ask the professors where you failed, right? Unless you establish a really great relationship with that professor, right? So first go to professors you've established relationships with. If you haven't, you're kind of going to cold call or cold email, in a sense, professors to figure out if they can write a letter of recommendation for you. And you have to remember, this is a favor that they're doing. They get requests all the time from not just undergrads, but graduate students as well. So there's a certain time in which professors are very busy writing these letters. Again, it's a favor that they're doing for you. So kind of make your case in an email. If you have a relationship, that's even better, because they will most likely write a letter of recommendation. But if they're busy, they'll let you know. Same kind of instance, you might email a professor and they might not reply. You can follow up and say, just, following up on this email, see if you can write a letter of rec. If they don't reply, then chances are they won't reply, right? So that also leads me to this other point, is to reply or to begin asking professors or letter of rec writers. They don't all have to be professors. They could be people from the community, or I don't know, people in your field, maybe researchers that aren't necessarily connected to academia. But do start this process early, because they might not reply again. So if you don't have someone that's not replying, then you're going to have to kind of figure out and say, okay, well, I'm going to have to move on and find another letter of or a recommender that I can reach out to. Yeah, don't ask them last minute. That's probably the last thing you want to do, is give them weeks or even months ahead of time. That way they know, and then follow up with a lot of reminders. Professors are inundated with emails they receive from their department, from grad students, from whatever professional kind of relationships they're in, or associations. Sorry. So give plenty of follow-up reminders, right? They receive a lot of emails per day, so just think about that. Think about how it is important to give reminders. Transcripts, you do have to pay for these official transcripts. They don't want, some might ask for copies, but very rarely. So you have to pay for these transcripts. From what I remember, probably around $10 to $20 for some of these transcripts. It can get expensive already thinking about the application, because you do have to also pay for these applications, and it can add up. These applications can range, I think, from 50 to 150 per application. So that's another thing to factor in thinking about, well, am I going to apply to this one institution that I, there's those institutions where you're like, do I realistically see myself in it? And so thinking about the monetary, like, do I have to pay for the application? Some institutions allow for vouchers. You have to kind of prove, it's all very, you have to really do this research, because I remember I only got one voucher from the 5, and I believe it was at UC Santa Cruz. So you have to figure that out too. Like, can you apply for vouchers, right? I don't really know the requisites as to what can allow you for that voucher, but do look into that, because if you're applying to 10 programs, right, it'll add up. And then also thinking about, this is just like another added, is those transcripts. You have to send those transcripts, those official transcripts. So the school, there's usually some sort of service that you have to go through. Each university has one, and UC Santa Cruz has one. And so then they send out you have to have a code for the university that you're sending it to, and so they know how to send it. But again, this can be very time consuming. It might not be quick. It's certainly not quick. Actually, there's usually an expedited service. Pay a couple, I don't know how much it is, but I remember like 20 to 30, even more, to get it expedited, because maybe you're late on this part. So do it with time. Just don't leave this to the very last minute, because it can be very worrisome to think about, I have everything in except for the transcript. Like, that's the last thing on your to-do list. Start early, because you don't want to have this like amazing application, and then all of a sudden you forgot to send those transcripts. Examples, most PhD and master's programs will ask for example. They want to know, so for example, if you're applying to history, they want to know that you're able to write. I'm not too sure about kind of medical fields or the sciences, but I would assume if it's a research kind of deal or institution, you're going to have to prove that you've done research. And these are projects you might have written as an undergraduate, or if you're from the master's going to a PhD program, right? Maybe your master's thesis, maybe your undergraduate thesis, right? If you have one. But do make sure it's related to the work you're actually going to end up doing, or something very exciting, right? I did something as an undergrad, which kind of led me to write a very exciting, I think, kind of sample essay that ended up being still the project I use to this day. I didn't stray away from, what I applied or how I applied, saying I'm going to do this type of research on murals of San Francisco, created by Latinx artists and Central American artists. And I never really deviated from that. That made me unique in a sense, because I was also a practicing artist. So I kind of stood out, I think, in that regard. So an important thing is to have professors, if you can, read over it, have trusted friends, people that can write really well, to read this example work or this research, right? because it really needs to shine. It does. You need to impress, the committee or whoever's going to, decide the admissions, because again, they want to make sure that it's going to be something that fits with their program as well. Again, I'm not sending art history to sociology, to sociology programs. So like, make sure it fits, right? That it makes sense. So do have people read over it, again and again, and you have to read over it, right? Don't be lazy, right? Try and find those spelling mistakes. You have to really double check. And this is just a general app. Make sure, because at some point you have to upload, or submit, click submit. And this is when you have to double check to make sure you're going to send the application. For example, I've always kind of, depending on how I'm doing this, I give myself some time. I basically give myself a day or two before hitting submit, to revise it another day. So like I'm basically to the point where I'm ready to submit. Sometimes you can see your own, usually they're PDF that you're attaching. So you can see your own PDFs. I just go through the website that wherever I uploaded it for the application, look at the PDFs and make sure that they are, there's no spelling mistakes, right? Or there's something that was incorrect, because it does happen. And so then that's when you double check and say, oh, I actually attached the wrong PDF. It's happened to me plenty of times, right? For applications and usually for grants and fellowships when I'm applying to grants and fellowships. But you have to just double check all the time, because little things could be off, right? Your email address, the most, small little mundane things that you think, you probably nailed. Just double check, triple check, make sure those are all correct. Have a professor, friend, again, someone you trust to read over the materials, and ask for feedback. Ask for that feedback because it's really important, especially if they're in your field or wherever you think you're going to be. Ask for that feedback. It's super important because somebody more senior than you probably has really insightful feedback to give. I actually did not ask for feedback for my I think it was my research essay. And, looking back, I think I looked at it a couple years afterwards and I realized there's a lot of spelling mistakes. It wasn't really clear, in my opinion, right? There was just sections that didn't really make sense to me, but, obviously you become a better writer, researcher, right? So with time, you'll be able to improve, but I didn't have anyone look over it is what I'm trying to say. So if I had somebody look over it, I'm sure they would have caught some of these little mistakes I had. So that's just word of advice. Okay, and this is getting towards the very end, right? I kind of already went through the whole application process. Those are the main points that you have to know in applying. And now you're at the application stage, and this is kind of interesting because I think this is also very helpful. You might have received several offers, right? Maybe you were, someone that's really has a really great research project. Maybe you're diverse somehow, or you have a lot of experience in whatever you're applying to. So they might really want. This is a good opportunity to leverage, leverage opportunities. So say, for example, I said earlier that a student, because they had GRE scores, kind of low GRE scores for that university, they couldn't supply with, more funding, but they were able to fund the summers. That was one leveraging kind of opportunity where someone was like, okay, well, they're offering me more here. Or I've also heard of students saying, this one university or this one department accepted me, but they allowed me to have lead instructor roles, like not a teaching assistant, right? But be the lead instructor. At your university, you're not allowing me to do that. So you can basically negotiate that and saying, can you give me, or that lead instructor role. That's just an example because that is an actual example. I know somebody who kind of leveraged that. They'll probably pull strings, right? And kind of, accommodate you because they might really want you. So don't be afraid to use that leverage, right? But also keep in mind that you should probably get that in writing. If they say something, if they commit to something and it's verbal, make sure to get it in writing and make sure to follow up and say, well, you promised this. Can I get it in writing? Because, you can say something, but make sure that they follow through. You can visit the campus. There's usually open houses once you've gotten accepted, which is actually kind of a really cool opportunity to travel if you're not from, if you're applying out of state. Even if you're applying in state, say you're applying to Southern California and you're from Northern California, right? Typically there's a stipend or they'll pay for that travel, which is really nice because they want you, right? They've accepted you already. But now it's your decision to make that decision if you really want to be there. So they'll typically you'll probably meet other grad students, you'll meet the professors you might be working with. And that's all, will give you a good sense of the environment, the culture of the grad program, which is great. That's a great opportunity. Use that opportunity to really make your decision, because again, are you willing to, live across the country for 2 years or potentially 7 years, right? If you're doing a PhD program. Those are all things you have to kind of experience in person, right? So again, think about what works for your own goals, aspirations, your tolerance level. Another tip is to read literature on grad student experience. Now, maybe there's not a whole lot on like a master's program, because again, those are pretty direct. You know what you're getting yourself into. But something I wish I read a lot earlier was The Professor Is In, because I, for example, wanted to become a professor after my PhD program. So The Professor's In the title itself, right? The Essential Guide to Turning Your PhD into a Job. It's really more focused into becoming a professor. Although there is tips about, leaving academia or using it beyond just being a professor or a researcher. But I really wish I read this early on my, journey to become a PhD, because it was just super insightful to know what's expected from a professor, right? The small things you could, like publishing. I published before graduating, right? That gives me kind of a, I don't know, compared to those who haven't published before graduating a PhD program, right? If you want to go into a research institution, well, it really helps to have published work. I had a lot of teaching experience as a PhD student. So that also helped me, because if I want to go to a teaching institution that focuses primarily on teaching, I have a lot of experience in teaching. So things like that. I haven't read a field guide to grad school, but I've heard good things. So also immerse yourself in that literature if you want to know more, because you want to make a good decision. You want to make sure you're doing the right decision. So reading these might kind of demystify the experience. Again, some master's programs are very specific. Like I mentioned, social work master's program. Like I know my sister went through that experience. So it seemed a lot more straightforward, right? When I did the master's in education, it was a lot more straightforward. I was just expected to teach my last semester at a K to 12 school, be basically like a resident. So be like a teaching assistant to be at an elementary school. I think I did a middle school and then a high school. So those are all experiences that were, I didn't have to study. I didn't have to do research necessarily. It wasn't a research, specific. So again, those are kind of just different ways in which you can, get a master's program. Now I completed a research, PhD, and that was a lot different, right? Wasn't expected really necessarily to teach, although I was a teaching assistant, but it was more about the work I produced, right? The writing, the research, the original kind of research I did through interviews and oral histories. And so I hope that was helpful. I want to end that this was adapted by Randall Malcolm, who wrote How to Apply to Grad School in 10 Easy Steps. He wrote it in 2012. You can find it online. It's pretty easy to find. It was adapted, inspired by that piece. So just in case anyone wanted to know more, you can always, look online too. There's a lot of resources online about this experience. So now we're going to open up to Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this insightful presentation. I'm sure our students learned so much from you. So moving on to the Q&A session, we have the first question asking, what are the most important tasks for applying to graduate school before graduating from an undergrad? And did you prepare any things before you took your gap year?
No, not necessarily. It was, I think, in the gap. Well, I was kind of in a unique position, to be honest. I had the Gates Millennium Scholarship, which allowed for, it was going to pay for my master's program. It was a scholarship that I got even as a high school student going into college. Um, so I knew I wanted to do the master's program, but that's also why I was very late in applying, because they only gave you literally a year for that gap year. And so I kind of rushed the whole application process. But yeah, I didn't really apply. I mean, it was kind of like I was hoping I got it. I got into two programs, but that's probably not the best response. But everyone has their own kind of personal journeys. But yeah, I didn't really prepare a whole lot, other than always knowing I wanted to be in art. So yeah, teaching murals and working with youth throughout undergrad was kind of my preparation, I think.
Mhm. Got it. Got it. All right. Moving on to the next question. Can you apply to the same school for graduate school that you did undergrad in? I think that's what you did, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly what I did, but different program. So it was, I mean, not that there's PhD in art, unless it was art history, yes, but the studio art was what I did. I was a practicing artist. I really saw myself as an artist. Um, and again, that didn't play out. I did the master's program and realized I did not want to be at the K to 12 level teaching. I really liked research. And so then that's when halfway through actually my master's program is when I applied for the PhD program. And yeah, you can totally, some people, it's not unheard of that they did their, undergrad, master's, and PhD at the same university. It's not super common, but it's not uncommon either. Like I've seen, if you look at people's trajectory, you can see people, they do their masters at the same institution. It's totally fine.
Mhm, mhm. Okay. Yeah, it's all choices.
Yeah.
So moving on to the next question, what exactly is MBA? Whenever I try to look it up, I get confused. I'm currently a business management econ major here at UCSC. Can I get into an MBA program here, from here, and what kind?
Yeah. So that's something I'm not an extreme like expert on. Um, yeah, master's in business. I think um, there's dual programs. From what I noticed from MBAs, you can sometimes do MBAs and they're paired up with another master's, which is actually pretty interesting because I knew, I believe my wife wanted to do an MBA with like museum studies or nonprofit work. I'm not too sure. Um, MBAs, yeah, that's pretty much all I can say about MBAs. Do the research on MBAs because I'm sure it's out there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, we do have a graduate school of business within the business field that are coming up. I've already linked it in the chat for you guys to register. But I can send that link one more time if you missed it. But moving on to the next question, um, would you recommend sending in transcripts even if the rest of your applications are not complete?
I recommend sending in transcripts. Yeah, that's tricky actually. Um, yes, just because, yeah, I mean, that's when you really should be sure about where you're applying to. That almost happened to me too, because I was so ahead of the game where I was like, I wanted to turn in the transcript to make sure it was. Um, yeah, I would say just be sure where you're going to apply to, because that's a cost. I mean, it's good things transcripts aren't super expensive, but the application is a lot more expensive, but the actual transcript could be relatively cheaper. So it's just a cost you're gonna have to eat up if that does happen.
Got it. So the other question is, would you recommend PhD program right after undergrad? Are full rights rare for a PhD programs right after undergrad?
No, they're not unheard of. I've seen folks be very dedicated. and maybe they have, really awesome research. There's also one thing I don't think I explained, that there's PhD programs, and sometimes en route to getting the PhD, you can get a master's. So for example, I have a master's in Latin American and Latino studies. I actually didn't state that, but it's en route to getting the PhD. Some folks do the PhD or do the master's program, and it's really after the master's program, like en route to the PhD, that they realize that they can't do the PhD. Like they're good at the master's level, and don't want to do like the next 4 years. It really depends on how the program is structured, but yeah. So keep that in mind too. That you can definitely get full rides. It's more like a financial package. It's not like, so you would have to TA, like for example, in a lot of the UC systems, UC PhD programs, you're gonna have to TA to eventually to pay basically your tuition and for you to survive, right? So yeah, but it's not unheard of. I've definitely met some folks who start straight out of undergrad and go into the PhD, and it's totally fine. Like it's all about your own tolerance. I do, however, have met some folks who like that's where they realize like maybe I'm not meant for a PhD, right? They do a year or two and they realize this isn't really for me. They want to see life outside of academia. So yeah, it's not like I do recommend it or I don't. It's like one of those things where it's like it's up to you. It's really your own decision. But I have seen people do it. It's not impossible. It's totally, I've seen folks do it.
Okay, got it. So the next question is kind of the similar realm. So would you be too old to start a PhD degree?
No, that's a good question. Master's and PhD degree, I've seen some folks who are, I think maybe we might kind of think everyone's going to be in their 20s. But I've seen people that are a lot older, have families, have had different careers and are switching careers. So yeah, you can definitely be, education's always there. I guess that's because some people stop and then they return, right? And that's what happens. Like school's always there. Like these institutions don't leave, these programs don't leave, they don't disappear.
Okay.
So it'll always be there. Yeah.
Got it. All right. So moving on to the next question, can you talk about how to choose how to choose the person to write your recommendation letter?
Here's where, again, if you really, it would be great to have some sort of relationship with that professor. If you don't, the second best thing is probably a class where you did really well in. That way the professor sees, you got an A or whatever from that class. And it is kind of cold emailing is what it, because you have to out of the blue kind of email these professors. You can also add your CV or resume and show them, you're doing all these kind of great things, or you might even want to share your idea for the research. And then they might support you. It is kind of a tricky one if you hadn't established that relationship, but if you have, it's a lot easier. And that's kind of what I would recommend. Or if somehow the teaching assistant can help you reach that professor. I don't recommend getting a letter of rec from a teaching assistant. Yeah, maybe for other types of job, but not for like a master's or PhD program.
Okay, so a follow-up question, and that will kind of be our last question because we're kind of over time.
Yeah.
So how should you ask for recommendation letters if you don't know where or which programs you're trying to apply to?
So that you should have a good sense of where you're applying to, because again, it has to be a good fit. It really, like in terms of, you wanna make sure you're actually gonna apply and follow through and say to that recommender, I'm applying to this school or I'm applying to 5. Can you write those 5? Some of them, there's this dossier service that if you do one, then it'll kind of upload all of them and kind of send them all at once. So that person or professor doesn't have to be sending individually to each. Yeah, but again, these are people that are going to vouch for you, and you have to tell them I'm applying for this. So say, for example, if I'm applying to art history, if I had professors that were in art history, those would probably be the best letter writers. But if I was applying to sociology, right, I might want to find social scientists or people that are in the field of social science. So make sure that there is a match. Not that an art history person, you know, if you're going to apply to sociology, they're really going to just more vouch for you as a person, right? As a researcher, as an awesome student, maybe you're in music or the arts, you know, they're going to vouch for you. So yeah, I guess that's my recommendation is really, you know, make sure you don't want to cause confusion. So if you're going to say, I'm applying to this school, you know, let them know you're going to follow through and actually apply.
Got it. Yeah, recommendation letter is always kind of tricky. So it's better that you start early, as soon as you know you wanted to apply, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you so much for all these presentation and answering all the questions from the students. And thank you, students, for participating in this event. Please don't forget to fill out the survey at the end, as well as register for the Graduate School Fair Week. And I hope to see you all at the Graduate and Professional School Fair Week. And hope you guys all have a good night.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Shalom.
Thank you,
for
too.
this.
Have a
Thank
good night.
everyone. I hope everyone has a good journey. Take care.
Good luck. Bye.